programs. You should know it's Marijuana Awareness Month. And one of the things we wanted to do this month is kind of dispel some of the myths around marijuana and show how damaging it's becoming in our community. Especially here in Sunny Slope, we got smoke shops everywhere, like every other corner. We have a dispensary here, and it's accessible to all of our kids. It's accessible to everybody, and it's kind of like no big deal for a long time, but we're starting to see that it is a really big deal. So our first speaker was a researcher from London, and she talked about marijuana-induced psychosis, which is a big thing now. And even though she's doing the research, there's real people behind the research, and so we reached out to Brandi from RiseUP Glendale, and she has a nonprofit group that does drug prevention, and she has a very personal story behind how she started this organization and her own experience with marijuana psychosis. So I would like to invite you and to thank you so much for coming and sharing all of this very personal story with us.
Absolutely. So I don't usually come speak at these things to share my story. This is very rare. Typically we're out, this is our mission. Everything we do is to empower youth to choose healthy, drug-free lives. And my story is actually why I do this job and why I'm involved. But like you can see some of our numbers from last year. We were able to do, actually this is the old slide, but anyway, we reached over 33,000 kids this last school year. We spend almost all day, every day in schools, we try and do prevention, but we also do diversion. So when people get caught using, most of the time I have a group of college students who go out and talk to the middle school and high school kids because they just relate. They're, lady in mid-40s, yes, they can relate with me, but sometimes, those college kids that are just past where they're at, they can just see themselves in them. So that's actually what we do most of the time, but I'm happy to be here to share like my why for why I do what I do. Can you hear me without the microphone?
Yeah.
Or should I?
Just for the recording.
Test. Okay, yeah, okay. All right, so my story starts back, it goes back quite a while, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about my brother before I go into the details of the marijuana. So I grew up in a family where we were very close-knit. I grew up on a small horse ranch. We raised, a lot of our own food, our own meat, we had a giant garden, and like I said, we raised horses. Next door was my aunt and uncles and cousins and grandparents, and we were all very close, right? We were very involved in church. My family homeschooled the 3 siblings behind me. So my older sister and I, we went to public school, graduated from public school, and we just had like a great family. My brother who was homeschooled, he, like I said, there was 5 kids in my family, but the one I'm going to focus on is the middle brother, or the second to youngest brother, okay? And he's off the charts IQ, just brilliant kid. He did a lot of research on botany and plants, and he wanted to be a homeopathic doctor. So he raised plants. He started working at farmers markets, helping educate people on natural options for anything that was ailing them, right? Just like homeopathic options. And he struggled a bit with anxiety when he was younger. Being a brilliant kid, you don't always fit in. Even though he was like good looking, outgoing, like adventurous, sometimes when your brain works a little bit differently, you feel like an outcast. Even though he didn't look like an outcast, he felt like one. And so when he was just in the summer after like 8th grade year, he was really involved in BMX, Black Mountain. He used to go out and race and was really involved in the community, and he had a homeschool group, so it's not like he was isolated. So he started, smoking weed with his friends and thought, okay, it's gonna like help me, fit in a little better, right? And he really believed that it was something that could help people. He began believing that, actually a lot of my family, we believed that big pharma, wasn't always the solution. We looked for natural options. We didn't think the pharmaceutical companies had our best interest in mind, which I actually still believe that. But was saying, they don't always, right? Sometimes it's about money, not about our health. And so he thought, wow, like marijuana is like a solution to that. And that was the belief from my brother. And like I said, a great, smart kid, friendly. He started helping neighborhoods develop community gardens. But then on the flip side, what we didn't know and what it took a long time to discover what was causing it was by the time he hit about 18, right when he was becoming an adult, he started having severe psychotic breakdowns. So he was developing paranoia and hallucinations, and all of his friends were like, dude, it must have been laced, like you got some bad stuff. But he grew his own, right? So it wasn't laced, it wasn't bad stuff, it was just impacting his brain. And so there were multiple times that we had to have him put into like a mental health facility to get him help. He would start doing really good, right? Because he couldn't smoke. He couldn't smoke when he was in the mental health hospital. So he'd come out, he'd be doing real good. He'd go back to smoking, and then he'd have another psychotic break. And these psychotic breaks were completely uncharacteristic. He's a kid who wouldn't hurt a fly, right? He's very kind, loving. He would see like a single mom. He's like, oh, like their kid doesn't have good shoes, like trade me shoes, and he'd give them like his nice shoes, like most generous person. But then in these psychotic breaks, he would actually be harmful, right? He attacked my sister. He was hallucinating, thought she was like a monster of some sort, went after her with like a police baton. And thankfully there were people there to stop him because it could have been a whole nother situation. I let him stay with me. He started having what he thought was like visions from God, or God telling him that he needed to save my children by taking them off this planet because people were going to harm them. And these were like this was like the hallucinations and things. And then the paranoia of the government. He would go in and out of what a lot of us would refer to as homelessness. He would go urban camping because he didn't want to contract with anybody, right? And so we had this whole series of 10 to 12 years of in and out of mental health hospitals, jails. At one point, I found a list on my kitchen counter, and it had a bunch of doctors' names, and some of them were scribbled out, arrows going to names. I'm like, what is this? And he was like, oh, those are the doctors I'm going to take out. I'm like, so like you're going to take all these people like out to lunch? Like, what is this? And he was like, no, these doctors are hurting people. They're making me take these meds, they're making other people take these meds, because at this point he had been diagnosed with borderline paranoid schizophrenia. And we just thought, oh man, he is struggling with his mental health. We had no idea it was associated with the cannabis. None at all. None of his doctors said, hey, why don't you stop smoking weed? Like, let's give that a shot. Not a single one of them. And so through all of this, as you can imagine, it was very traumatic for our family, right? We loved him, we wanted to help him, but how do you help? And we were actually extremely embarrassed also. So we didn't talk about it very often. We're like, we're just gonna keep the secret, we don't have crazy people in our family. And so we really didn't talk about it. We tried to hide it. We tried to do our best to help him. My husband picked him up, my brother up, or when he stayed with us, take him to work every day, and he'd be like hiding on the floorboards. Like, did you see that license plate number? Like, did it have this in it? I think those are the people out to get me. Like, extreme paranoia. Couldn't hold a job consistently. And then he started getting some help. At some point, he started drinking occasionally. And one of his therapists was like, yeah, maybe you should stop drinking, right? Still never like mentioning the weed, right? Because the weed was probably helping him, is kind of what everybody thought. And then, so he started going to like Celebrate Recovery at a church and getting help for, to stop drinking. And for him, he just said, okay, I don't think this is good for my body. None of this is good. I'm gonna quit. So on his own, he took the steps to stop using anything. For drugs, he only smoked marijuana. He didn't use any of the other drugs. And then within 2 years, I know 2 years sounds like a long time, but there's hope in recovery. But after 2 years, he was off all of his antipsychotics and his his borderline paranoid schizophrenia diagnosis was gone. He was on just a mild antidepressant, and my brother was back, and he was able to live a normal life, hold a job. He wasn't having psychotic breaks, wasn't having the paranoia, because he stopped using the marijuana. And so at that point, I felt like an idiot, right? You know, this whole time, like, I voted for legalization. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, so I was part of the problem, right? I never once encouraged him to stop. We thought, oh, it might be helping him. You know, there was all this jargon about medical marijuana and that it's gonna help people. And so from that point, I started doing lots of research. There's the National Marijuana Institute, there's RiseUP, so it's doctors collecting data. I've probably put in hundreds of hours of research on marijuana at this point, trying to figure out like what happened. And it turns out we're not even close to like isolated in this. I meet people at least on a weekly basis who have very similar stories. And when we work with HIDA, we work very closely with the DEA. We're in like a 2-year partnership with them right now. We work with our local law enforcement, and it's pretty normal. And a lot of like the school shootings and stuff, cannabis was a factor in many of them. You don't see it on the media, it doesn't hit the news, but cannabis was a factor. Cannabis-induced psychosis was a factor. So it's absolutely impacting mental health, and some of our families it's impacting a little more than others, right? And you never know when that person's going to be impacted from it. I want to show you a little video we created, because at one of the school districts we work with, what they were experiencing is that most of their students they actually had hundreds of students who had like self-proclaimed that their coping skill or what they call a coping method was to smoke, and to smoke weed, and that was their coping method. And so they asked us, hey, can you create like a video training, something that's pretty easy that our facilitators, you can create a guide to it, that can help our youth understand why using marijuana as a coping skill is actually negative for the mental health, not a positive. So it's like 13 minutes. Oh, my computer went down. Okay. So we're just gonna show this real quick. And there's spots where we pause and we'll just like discuss a little bit. I was gonna do a little activity with the post note, but just because of the sake of time, I didn't, so you guys can bring those back later. But how to make the sound work? Ooh, I can hear it.
I think if you turn the volume on your...
Doesn't matter how you cope.
Can you guys hear that?
Enormously. How you choose to regain a sense of peace, joy, and happiness in your life will establish what you treasure most, a foundation upon which you will build everything else. If you choose to focus your mind on growing in relationship with, respecting and loving others, living intentionally, working on yourself, understanding that you must approach this life with humility, that you are in a constant process of learning and understanding how things work, then you are on a great track. But if you run to a quick fix, like the rush of eating junk food, gossiping, or abusing substances, you're creating a life of selfish gain that leads to more problems and slavery to things that destroy your life.
All right, so what are some healthy ways? What are some things you guys do when you're stressed out? What are healthy for you? Just anyone, tell me.
Take a nap.
Take a nap, okay. Healthy amount of sleep, right?
Yeah.
What else?
Music.
Music, yep. Work, yep. Anybody else? Exercise.
Walk the dogs, call friends.
Fresh air, dogs in themselves, petting and walking, like that kind of thing. The relationship with pets, that's a great coping skill. All right, so normally we have like a discussion with kids on this, but.
Specifically, in this video, we'd like to address using marijuana or cannabis to enhance your life or obtain relief from anxiety and stress. This is not meant to guilt trip you, but inform you out of love. We want to first acknowledge what you likely have heard about the positive feelings that using marijuana can bring. No doubt, people experience euphoric feelings, a sense of relaxation and less worries about the world. At least some do. But with those feelings also come other symptoms like paranoia, an altered sense of time, apathy, difficulty with thinking and problem solving, impaired memory, hallucinations and psychosis, nausea and vomiting. Not only these, but anxiety, stress, and depression, the very feelings those who use marijuana are running from. Effects like these interfere with your ability to drive, leading to potential car accidents that could have devastating consequences for you and others. Marijuana is the most commonly used federally illegal substance in the United States. This is from the DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration. Marijuana is a Schedule I substance under the Controlled Substances Act, meaning that it has a high potential for abuse, no currently accepted medical use and treatment in the United States, and a lack of accepted safety for use under medical supervision. Cannabis refers to the entire plant, used in a variety of ways, from smoking the leafy green portions, eating them in various forms, or vaping oil or wax concentrates known to be high in their THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, content, the main psychoactive ingredient found in cannabis. THC has risen over the years from 3% in the 70s to upwards of 99% potency in concentrated forms of marijuana. This increase is linked to a higher likelihood of experiencing psychosis, a loss of touch with reality, seeing and hearing things that aren't there, leading people to say and do things they wouldn't otherwise.
I was 17 when cannabis started to really affect my mental health. I remember really vividly, I had been for a run in the morning and smoked a joint straight after. And I was on my way to school, and it felt as if my brain was just falling out of my head. And I started to develop panic attacks and anxiety, which got progressively worse and worse. And it was after that point that I started to develop quite chronic anxiety and paranoid delusions as well. So I started to believe that friends and family were trying to poison me, and I would have to see all of my food being prepared.
I used to smoke a lot of weed, and then one time I just got some wild stuff that I think was laced, and then ever since I haven't felt the same. And I talked to somebody about this recently too. It's almost like you're watching your life, but it's a movie. Like you're watching it happen. It's like, I don't remember who I was talking to, but it's called depersonalization or something. And I was like, you feel that way too? And I was like, oh, and I don't know. It's just super strange, man. Ever since then, I felt like I'm not actually like living my life. I'm just watching it happen.
Really?
It's super interesting
This is
thing.
from one experience.
From one thing, and I felt like this was like, I was like curled up. I was like, call my mom, like, oh.
All right, so then we ask kids like, hey, how has substance use impacted your life? Have you heard any stories about actors, actresses, if they don't want to share something personal? And usually there's almost everybody like something has impacted, and we don't make anybody share, but we do explain that there is a greater amount, you have a greater chance. 9 out of 10 people with substance use disorder started using before the age of 18. So if they can withhold from using while their brain is developing, which doesn't develop fully until the age of 25, their chance of developing a substance use disorder decreases quite a bit, right? Tremendously, actually. So I'll just keep going.
After a psychotic episode, the individual may not remember much of what happened. Among other tragedies, suicides have been in connection with using marijuana. Chronic cannabis users can develop cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, known as CHS. Individuals with CHS experience severe nausea and repeated vomiting, even scream vomiting. To combat the nausea, they take very hot showers or baths. This condition can cause severe dehydration and kidney failure, leading to death.
Day 6, of not smoking or consuming any weed or THC in any form, and it's been rough. I'm having a panic attack right now, and I don't really know how to get through it. After a lot of testing at the gastroenterologist, I have discovered that not only do I have 2 active stomach ulcers, a delayed gastric cycle, which means that my digestive tract is not moving food through it at the proper rate that it should be, but I was also tentatively diagnosed with cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. I've been smoking for about 3.5 to 4 years now on an everyday basis, multiple times a day.
The brain is the central nervous system and impacts all parts of our body, including the gastrointestinal system. CHS is believed to be caused by activation of CB1 receptors, which affect the gut. The best way to prevent CHS and scromiting is to not use cannabis. If you've had an episode of CHS in the past and you use again, you're at high risk of developing another episode. Right now, there's no research on whether a certain dose of THC is more likely to cause CHS. That means there's no safe amount of THC you can use and know you won't develop it. One study of emergency room patients found that roughly 33% of people who reported smoking cannabis 20 or more times per month had CHS. Research also suggests that most people with CHS are between ages 18 and 40, but anyone who uses cannabis, regardless of age, can get CHS. Speaking of cannabinoid receptors, they are a part of the endocannabinoid system, ECS, which is greatly affected by using cannabis. The ECS modulates the stress and reward networks in your brain, and repeated use of drugs can blunt the euphoric effects and increase levels of stress. Your brain learns about the rewarding behaviors of drug use and begins to give you desires for drugs instead of the natural pleasures of life. This is the vicious cycle of addiction, chasing the reward and destroying your brain in the meantime, among other things. It is well known and documented that the adolescent brain, ages 0 to about 25, is at greater risk for addiction because the brain is still developing. These years are crucial for us to protect and nurture as the brain becomes fully developed. Tragically, the 29th annual report of the Arizona Child Fatality Review Program states of the 59% of abuse and/or neglect deaths that involved substance use, marijuana was the most identified substance, contributing to 31% of child abuse and/or neglect deaths. You may be familiar with PTSD. Traumatic events cause people to suffer mentally. Your mind needs to be protected to protect how you experience life. You need control of your thoughts and emotions to live in a way that is more fulfilling. It's scary to lose your mind. Something older folks might endure unwillingly, but you choose to distort reality for a false sense of peace when you use marijuana. It's like bottling up emotions. You're not actually working through your problems. You're running from them. Weed is addictive. There is no freedom found in abusing cannabis. It subjects you to slavery. Can't sleep without weed. Can't be happy without weed. Being a stoner is made out to be an identity, like it's who you are and are proud to be. But there is nothing about being a stoner that anyone should ever be proud about. You are worth so much more than that. You are not a better athlete or artist when you're high. You can remember better when you're sober. You can put those great ideas to action instead of sleeping on them. And freedom from fear and anxiety can be found. Drugs will never satisfy you. Marijuana is not harmless. It's far from it. We've put a dent in sharing what's known about the effects of cannabis, but there is more to know, like the loss of IQ and lung damage, and more research is needed as time continues. A study of adult male rhesus macaques, or monkeys, that consumed increasing amounts of THC over time revealed that, in total, average bilateral testicular volume decreased by 58% over the course of the study. This is your life.
I always ask
your
the kids,
brain.
I'm like, okay, so what did that mean? I always have kids, they're like, shrinks your brain? I'm like, it's one way to look at it. But no, it shrinks your balls. And they're like, what? You know, that always gets, especially when we're like the freshman health classes, they're like, it's another thing most people
And
don't
you
know.
have the power to prevent ever using marijuana and subjecting yourself to brain damage, lung damage, and possibly CHS. When you're dealing with ongoing stress or something stresses you out and you need to de-stress, there are many alternatives, like journaling, writing down what's going on, what you're thinking about, how you're feeling, to work through them, going for a walk or a run, hanging out with friends and talking about the things that you're going through. Play games with them, go fishing, learn something new, knit, crochet, build something, draw or color, read a book, listen to music. Singing helps reduce stress. Pray. Work through your hardships with others the best you can. Don't hold grudges and forgive others. Find ways to help your friends and family. Giving to others blesses us too. Work on not procrastinating. For example, study in small amounts frequently. Don't overwhelm yourself right before finals. Whatever you do, make sure it's productive for your health and well-being. Your life is not without purpose or meaning, so treat yourself with respect.
So this is worded weird. We were asking, like, so for students who tend to turn to a substance, what are some healthy alternatives or ways that you can stay, I don't like the word clean, I almost said that, sorry, it's a bad habit word, so that you can stay like in recovery, you know, that you can stop using the substances. And so we take examples of things that they have tried themselves or that they know to work, and then we provide additional alternatives to using substances. So when they have that craving, what can they do, right? And of course, we always recommend people having accountability, whether that's from like a counselor or parents or loved ones, because doing it by yourself most of the time is unsuccessful. And there's literally just like less than 2 minutes
In
left.
case of a situation where you're hanging around people who are using drugs, develop a rescue plan with a trusted adult. Decide on an emoji or something quick and known between you and that person that if sent, it means help, come get me. If you're ever handed a drug, you can tell them that your parent needs you to come home right now and leave the situation. Develop a plan of action in these scenarios where you're afraid to say no. It will make it a ton easier to avoid drug use.
That's it. That's the video. Thanks. So, as I told you, that was a request of a school district. Hey, can you put, we haven't been able to find any sort of presentation or training that addresses all of those things. So that was our attempt at addressing all of the things that the school district requested. And so far, we've had really great feedback from the kids on it, and people reach out to us on social media later or to their social workers or counselors at school, and they're like, okay, I need help. Like, I'm not able to do this on my own. And so we've seen great progress with it in the particular school district that I'm talking about. It's available on YouTube if you think anybody needs to see it. We actually have a lesson plan that goes along with it, because if kids don't speak up and start the conversation, sometimes you need to engage, in conversation and, get some additional questions to help drive that conversation. One thing this doesn't address is how often fentanyl can be laced in marijuana. So I did bring Narcan here today. If anybody does not carry it yet, I recommend everybody carry it. We know how prevalent fentanyl is in Arizona.